So welcome everybody to this, the Audit Committee, a meeting of June 9th, 2026. It's just after 3 o'clock. In the email message that I shared with members, I reminded folks that this is the first meeting of this committee as currently constituted. There are 2 new members, council representation, and as such, I'm going to open the meeting, call the roll, and just say that we have 3 councillors, Councillor Bagley, Moreau, and Flynn, and public member Don Rabent with us. And then I'll lead us into determination of the chair, who can, with support, go ahead and lead the rest of the meeting. And so I would not suggest that we need this to be terribly formal, but
I would nominate Councilor Moreau as chair.
You haven't even done roll yet.
Oh, I thought I was.
mine is.
Are we going to say whether or not we're present?
Sure. Call the roll, Councillor Bagg.
Here.
Councillor Flynn.
Here.
Councillor Moreau.
Here.
Member Rabent.
No.
I would, around the table, I'll make introductions that between Councillors Bagley and Flynn is Mike Tucker, Deputy Finance Director. To my left is Suzanne Woodland, who is Regulatory Counsel. My name is Nathan Lundy, and I'm your Deputy City Manager, Finance and Administration. And as comfortable as we are, why don't the public members introduce themselves?
Thank you. I'm Chris White. Live on Porter Street.
Patriota, Worcester, Street,
Perfect.
former counselor, former chair.
Excellent.
Mr.
Former
Webb
chair.
of the Audit Committee.
So with the roll taken, I open the conversation of chair.
I'll nominate Councilor Moreau as chair. If I get a second, I'll speak to it.
I would second that.
According to the
We're friends.
committee structure, one of the councilors has to be chair. And Councilor Moreau is the only councilor with experience on the audit committee. So I think he'd be an excellent chair.
Do I get to vote against myself?
Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, then I would call the question on the election of Councilor Moreau as chair of the committee. Those 4 voting members, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition?
I
3-1.
Congratulations, Councilor Moreau. Voted against myself.
I will
Yes, we have approval of the minutes, of which we do, and I have the only 2 that actual members are there. So I will look for a motion to approve the minutes of October 14th, 2025.
So move.
Second.
And are there any questions or changes on the mistakes found in the minutes? I do, but I don't have the best eyes on.
I did watch the meeting, but I'm going to abstain since I was.
It all looked good to me. Yeah, all right, so then I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Aye.
Abstain.
All right, approval of the minutes is done. Yeah, I didn't know I was the chair and had to come and actually. So, okay.
I would, let me help and just say that when we met in October, this is getting ahead and then stepping back. When we met in October, the committee voted to recommend renewal of our engagement to the council. The CLA chose not to provide us with a quote until after the engagement was complete. And so now we have that to consider, and I asked the committee members if they thought that should go before the council or if it should come to the committee first, given that we had 2 new members out of a membership of 4 right now. Suggestion was that we ought to meet. So in the back and forth that I had with a couple of members, there was a suggestion that we should talk at least briefly about the charge, what's the responsibility of the committee. And so I asked Suzanne to join me and help, simply because I didn't have all of that history about where we come from and where we are and what that charge is now. I thought we'd have a resource. So I, for sake of discussion, do have to help the conversation. the excerpt from the ordinance. Folks are interested.
That's the 1.4
1.41. The link was in the link was in the link was in the agenda, but just so you have that.
So we talked about the committee charge before we talk about COA.
Yes.
So I've read it, I talked about it at the last meeting. Frankly, it really doesn't have a lot of meat, you know, and one of my concerns I said to Nathan at that meeting was, who tells you whether it's a serious audit problem? And now reading these bylaws, it says that the auditor does. Frankly, I don't know why the hell I'm here. You don't really need me for this charter. You know, if you want some, if you council people want some help with this, if you want us to meet every year to review the audit and just say it looks all right or not all right, happy to do that. But without it, no, I don't need to come every 3 years to vote on a new agency. That's how I feel.
So it's not at least one meeting. We met not. There's not more than one meeting, it's one meeting a year in advance of the audit.
So when we met in October, I would share with you, when we met in October, we met because there had not been a meeting and we were talking about the renewal of an engagement with CLA. And at that point, we had the auditor come in and step back and do a review of fiscal year 24's audit results. And we intended then that we would have another meeting in advance of the final FY25 going before the council. But then we had an election and we had no committee appointments made until after we had scheduled to get the audit in front of the council. So we have not had a meeting. Those appointments didn't come until late in January. And so I waited then for CLA to come forward with the proposal that we've been asked for. Now that we have that budget is behind us, we've scheduled an opportunity.
Would you like some background to it?
Well, as a new member, let me give my perspective. In the past year, there have been several audits, and I'll mention school care because that was very public, spoken publicly about it. And that was not, an auditor speak, that was a very damning audit. They gave terms like, we're not sure that they will be an ongoing, so there are substantial doubt that this will be. So, I mean, it was full of red flags, let's say. And my understanding as a counselor and engineer by trade, not a financial expert, is the reason we have this audit committee is because you have the city books, which are audited by an outside firm, and a group of counselors who may not necessarily be accounting experts or CPAs or things of that nature. And what we want is a citizen's eyes who is, only concerned with the city and is not too close to anything, to look at that. And if there is something like a red flag or what you consider a red flag in there, then that's putting sunlight on it as quickly as possible. So that's what I think we have two things when I read the plain language. One is we have to select a firm, which my understanding is there aren't that many firms to select from. So it's not like, we're selecting new tires for our car. We got 100 options. We've got 1 or 2 options at most. And two, what we want to make sure is somebody with expertise and as a citizen of the town is looking at this. And if there's anything at all that is of concern, we run it up the flagpole as quickly as possible. Now, obviously, if it was as direct as the school care one, that everybody would notice that, but we're kind of relying on you for the stuff that might be a little more subtle.
I just want to go back to what I said at first and what I started with. I want it said for the record, this is not a witch hunt for me. I don't hear anything that says there's big issues. And I have respect for Nathan, and I was town treasurer of Exeter for 33 years. And we knew each other, but that doesn't matter. I think I'm not here thinking that there are problems. There needs to be. an issue, but I think if you're gonna have an audit committee, it's gotta have a job.
I think it's been so new in the time that we started this, and I think Suzanne can help give us some of the background of how it was created. I think we're all still learning on it, how to use the other as well, so I think that would be helpful.
So you start with your city charter, which requires an annual audit. And has an audit requirement. And I think you were probably the closest to in terms of the most history other than me and folks sitting down here at the other end of the table. There was a discussion at the city council level as to whether to have an audit committee at all. So a lot of discussion. And the city council kind of went back and forth. Originally, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Phaedra, it was originally a blue ribbon committee, I think, to start, and then formalized with an audit committee structure in chapter 1, which is what you have before you. And there was a lot of conversation at the city council at the time in terms of the scope. So because most communities in New Hampshire do not have audit committees, there was a, question, how big should that role be? And so ultimately, after a lot of back and forth at the city council, the scope of the audit committee is as you see it in chapter 1, which is fairly narrow. Because the city at that time had not changed auditors in a long time, nor even gone out for RFP. And so that was kind of a critical sense, okay? So having a voice and helping the city council make a decision on who should do the audit. So that was piece number 1, and you see that. Piece number 2 was what happens if, to Councillor Bagley's point, there are red flags that come out of the audit. And in the back and forth, what was ultimately the conclusion of the city council at the time, when they adopted this, was we really don't want to have an audit committee made up principally of, at that time, citizens, sort of involved in the sort of nuts and bolts of working with the finance department in that audit. We want to wait until the audit is completed. And then there's hey, we should have the auditors sit down with the audit committee, go through it, particularly if there are red flag issues. And if there are no red flag issues, what has traditionally been done is the auditors come in January, and it's a joint work session typically between the city council and the audit committee, with the auditors there to review the findings of the audit. And part of that is the sensitivity. Keep in mind, the city council tends to like to know things at least contemporaneously with the residents. So the thought is you have the expertise, but everyone's hearing and learning about the situation at the same time. So that was part of the dynamic. That could change, it's committees are living and breathing by the ordinance. So certainly if this city council wanted to change the scope of the audit committee's purpose, that is within the purview of elected officials to make that change. But you will see it's very narrow, and it was intentionally very narrow, and part of it was just the reflection of the city manager has the obligation to run the city, to take the policy decisions and the direction of the city council, and to provide all of that and deliver good financials and an audit every year, which the city council reviews the auditor. So that's just my background. And that's why you see kind of the more narrow scope. And it was a very engaged conversation amongst the elected officials at the time as to how wide or narrow that scope was. I think just so that you keep in mind, given what you probably need out of this, certainly I think out of this meeting today, if the decision is still to make a recommendation to the city council to proceed with CLA, get that on a vote today so that we could get it on the next city council agenda and that piece could go forward, because as I'm sure these folks will tell you, the audit is already, for the following, is starting again. It's that cycle continues, so I wouldn't delay further. if you're in accord by the time you get towards the end of this meeting. So that the city council can put their blessing on proceeding with CLA. So I'll stop there and yeah, just a background.
There any more questions?
So the proposed contract, and because of I predict for kind of the committees, whatever we recommend here, the city council typically would accept, but has the option to send back to us or vote down or whatever. So whatever we decide today is not etched, so it's likely to happen. We would be committing to 3 years with an option for an additional 3 years. So we essentially would be committing to about 400,000, not quite $375,000. $375,000 of
Well, that's,
projected expenses over the next.
it's a different
3 years.
analysis. To give you some extra information.
And not being an expert in how much audits cost, I'm not gonna comment on whether these fees are reasonable or not reasonable, because they seem, for a city of our size and not a work involved, that seems like a.
If it helps you, we pay at the RDC, which is a much smaller organization that deals with like less than your budget. I believe we pay anywhere from around 15,000 to 5,000.
Okay,
When you're out, those are, very tiny to ginormous, I think it's very reasonable, yeah.
so I'm not getting, these numbers don't like scare me away, like, oh my gosh, it's $1 million. A lot of money, but something we have to spend the right amount of money on, it's so important.
And we be reminded what we paid for the last year. I don't remember.
So the sheet I just passed around, I thought I'd get you some metrics that you could work with. So the original engagement that the city committed to had a price tag for the first 3 years. The audit of fiscal 23, 24, and 25 had costs of $105,000 with a $5,000 escalator. So 105, 110, and 115. So for the year finished 25, it was 115. The proposal before you increases the engagement by $4,000 for each of the first 3 years. So to 119, 123, 127. And then for the optional 3 years, they're proposing another $5,000. So that takes us to.
But we could renegotiate that.
We could when we get there for sure, yeah. It was. So, and I thought it was worthwhile to, given some of our conversations, to run the metrics and look at the averages and just figure out how that compares to economic conditions we're seeing otherwise. It's those rates. I'd have to let CLA speak to it to justify it if we had questions, but they're not out of line with contracted service increases that we're seeing across the board, so.
Yeah, and the previous company that we had doing this prior to choosing CLM actually went through yet another merger because they're the ones that do the RDC. So that's the only reason I know that.
So I have a technical question, I think, so don't answer.
Yep.
The 4 of us are needed until the council term.
Well, no, the 3 of us are appointed to the end of our council.
Oh, right,
Right,
you're
right.
on a
Yeah,
Different.
schedule.
Just the citizen.
So, to me, this is a terrible time for us to make an important decision because it could be 3 brand new people in 2 years. So I would like to see us renegotiate so that we start the option year. We do this year. And we start the option year next year, because then we can come back having some expertise and the 4 of us can make a better decision. Rather than setting it up so that, it may or may not be brand new counselors who are choosing the auditor, if that makes sense.
That's really, I don't have any.
Yeah, I would tell you that when we met in October, the vote that was taken was to renew, and the suggestion at the time was another 3-year engagement like the 3 years we had. To be fair, I don't remember there being a conversation about how that would coincide with the cycling of counselors. What it was targeted at was relaunching the implementation of a new chart of accounts, a new ERP system, and not having to switch canoes in the middle of the cycle, middle of the ERP, have somebody who knows what our chart looks like and has audited those books as we begin, is with us through that transition. Made sense for, the commitment of time and effort from both parties, the city and the auditor. Switching gears in the middle of the ERP implementation would be a struggle in terms of setting priorities and working our way through that and having to explain to a new auditor what this is, where it came from, why we do it in the middle of trying to make reconciliations fly and roll from cycles and from software to software. So that was part of the decision.
Well, it seems like I remember some time ago remarking that there was a requirement that the auditors change after a certain period of time.
So there is no requirement under state law or under our charter to turn over an auditor at any particular time. So it really comes down to, generally, from a procurement perspective, we like to go out roughly every 3 to 5 years, depending on the nature of the services. So that is, it depends a lot on, you wouldn't change an engineer, for example, in the middle of a 10-year project, and we've got 10-year projects. But that's why, in fact, it was slow. We needed to do an RFP sooner than we did.
Was there at some point in the city charter a requirement to change? I know, because you brought it up.
Yep.
And it is not there.
What?
If there is no requirement to change auditors.
There was though.
There was.
There was,
Yeah.
yeah, and in real life, there is.
Sarbanes-Oxley required. The other thing is, from a logical perspective, you couldn't change auditors. There needs to be a time frame. If it would be very expensive to bring a new firm in the middle of the year, something like that. It needs to be an organized structure. At some point, whether it's 2 or 3 years, there needs to be a structure.
Yeah.
Tom, to your point, I'm sorry, if I may. So,
It's up to the chair.
Chair.
Well, I think I'd rather wait for public comment,
Okay.
just to stick to the agenda.
Alright, so in light of Nathan's comments. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your last, Mr. Right?
Very good.
Alright, guys, comments. Wouldn't make sense to change next year, in my opinion. You reconcile old books, new books, bringing somebody new in, teach them something that we're gonna throw away the next year is silly. So the 3-year contract. That would put us. So say. We would cycle off in 27, new people in 28. Second year in 29, so we're on the right cycle for second year counselors. Potentially.
And remember, I would propose you not wait, like where we sit today, I need an auditor to be here on the 23rd.
Right.
Oh, okay, so
Right.
a year ahead of time we're talking about.
So a year ahead you would start, so you'll get started on that process. As you begin in this case, as you begin your 6th year, you'll be looking at competitive. If you choose not to do optional years, you'll be looking to be competitive in that year.
Okay, that makes sense.
I wouldn't want to see us change auditors in the middle of upgrading, changing our financial system. I just don't, it doesn't make any sense, and I think that I now remember the conversation we had in October about that was. We really wanna stick with the same company that understands our financials and works with us through this transition versus trying to bring in somebody new and teach them, because that will be expensive. All that extra time, so I am good with 3 years and re-looking at it after year 3, and no matter what, our council terms are so short that we're going to have, who's sitting is gonna have to do some work that the other council will then have to pick up. There's just no way around that. Because these contracts, 3 years is fairly typical from what I've seen in the 4 years I've been doing this. So, yeah, it's, and there should be when one leaves and the other one comes in, there should be somebody there that actually knows what happened the previous year. And so that's better to change auditors in the middle of a 2-year council term if you're gonna do it, which would mean we would have to almost start a year before we leave in order for them to take it over a year later.
So
I know that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it does in my head.
I'm convinced that this makes sense, and I would imagine if we do the contract as structured, you get the best terms because they've got to be business, so they don't incentive because that term.
And
Would
they
we-
lowered the increase, so that's nice. To support
Yeah, I
that,
saw
which is
that.
fine,
Would we meet like again in the fall, like so,
not till the audit comes out.
So
That-
January is when we typically.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as one of the elements of praise that I had for CLA when we met in October was they have been very, number one, they've been responsive, they've been quick with follow-up. They have an outstanding client portal.
you think of the non-tips, right?
Yeah.
Client portal where we interact with all the data streams. But they also are experienced with and have other clients who chase the GFOA cycle. And so they've worked with us to be sure that they are helping to the extent that they're involved with reflecting changes based on feedback that we get through the GFOA review and award process, helping us to incorporate those informational changes in the supplemental information in the act for instance, but also paying attention to timelines. So part of what we did last year was they came in for some initial field work in June, and then they were back the last week of September to do their primary field work, and then we were targeting to have initial drafts done of the act prior to Thanksgiving, because the deadline for the GFOA submission is New Year's, so the 31st of December. So they worked really hard at that. One of the things that we have in as an expectation this cycle is that I'd like for us to be able to have a document that is ready for the audit committee to review before Christmas, so that we can then be ready to publish and meet with the council and the audit committee as soon as they're ready for us in January. And they're open to that, eager for that. That's kind of where we're trying to get to this last cycle. And we were ready with the act in December, third week, maybe it was a week before Christmas, we were ready. The PAFR, which is the popular annual financial that we do, that we were still cleaning that up as we got into the week between Christmas and New Year's, but they both were submitted before the 31st. And that's the timeline, and I appreciate that they've come to the work. So I would imagine either the week before Christmas or the first week or so of January, we'd have an opportunity to put it to the audit committee so they could review it for feedback to the council. One of their January meetings.
As part of their annual audit procedures, they do a general fraud inquiry or looking at some type of abuse. And typically for the past 2 years, they've reached out to Councilor Tabor just to do one of those inquiries. So that's typically right after our audit planning, probably early July, just ask general questions. And I think it's a good practice too, as the audit committee, just to share any areas of concern. If there were any to arise to the auditors. I know as my experience as an auditor, sometimes we meet with the committee and they say there's a particular area that they want us to do some testing procedures in. So I know that is a potential option, just to be free and open with them, because really the job is to have good oversight and also to kind of direct their procedures to a certain extent. They've got their wide standard procedures, but if there's like a particular area or department that you want to look at, they can do that as well.
Gone through those interviews for the Rocky. Last 2 years, yeah.
So I would share with you that although a vote had been taken in October and that drove the request of CLA, it was clear that you guys would prefer to take your own vote for ratification. So
Yeah, I think we would have to, for essentially,
and
we're not a new, I don't know how it works.
it's newly constituted.
Yeah,
So what we'd be looking for, as I jotted down some notes, is a motion to recommend to council to move forward with a 3-year extension of the auditor contract with the intention to keep the same auditor during the financial software changes. Just I want to put that in so it explains to council why our thought process around that was. And if somebody would like to make that motion.
So wait for public comment, or you're just gonna roll right through it,
then we do public comment.
or you vote?
Second.
Any discussion?
No.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It's just a recommendation to council, they can do what they want.
And as I understand it, we're anticipating probably December, early December, and earnings.
Late December or early January.
Or we should do it, that's the meeting. It's going cool.
All right, this is clearly. Yep, for all of us, because the MD&A, we've got components and that we have to do to wrap that document up as well. So yeah, setting a deadline and just saying, let's get it done by that time.
Okay.
And it makes us ready for the GFOA,
Yeah, we gotta
compliance
get it.
process anyway.
All right, I'm gonna make a second motion,
Okay,
that the audit committee reconvene on December the 17th, Thursday, December the 17th.
oh, that sounds like a really good planning board night. I can tell you right now.
Well, I don't do sailing weekend. Is there a preference for the 15th or the 16th, which is Monday or Tuesday?
Hang on.
Usually when I'm 6 months out, it's just all over the place.
Yeah, well, mine's not.
Although,
It's fine.
December 16th or 17th.
the 17th, Beth thinks she has a council meeting.
Yeah,
Has a
And
board.
that's the third Thursday of the month, which is indeed a planning board night. So I would suggest, yeah, the 14th. Or the 16th. Which is my suggestion. I mean, we could do the 15th. If we wanted to.
Let's do the 16th, if everybody's okay with that, because Monday meetings can be tough, because that means a lot of work and weekend to get things ready. And if I can avoid working people to do that, I always try to.
So 16? Sure.
December 16th.
Same time.
Let's.
Yeah,
It's
let's
4
set it.
p.m. 4 p.m.
Or, yeah,
I'm retired, so
Oh, I pushed it to 3 today because of my evening schedule.
Yeah.
That was the only reason I got bumped up, it's,
all right, I'm gonna rescind my motion and remake it, because
thank
there were a lot of changes.
yes.
I move that the audit committee reconvene on Wednesday, December 16th at 4 p.m.
Second.
All right, any more discussion? All those in favor? Aye. All right, there are no more motions. We're gonna run to public comment.
Okay. Should we do that? First of all, I'd like to go over the audit committee ordinance. And in that, it says the city manager shall be a member of the committee and a voice non-voting. And I'd also like to remind you of the breach of independence. Having the department head who is being audited being on this committee. And also, I don't know your last name. Michael Tucker. And I like to read for those of you who are not familiar with financial auditing, a little excerpt on the definition of what this means. Independence in auditing is crucial for maintaining objectivity and impartiality. Auditors must avoid situations that can compromise their ability to perform their duties without bias. Implications of having a finance manager on the audit committee. Having a finance manager who's being audited on the audit committee is indeed a breach of independence. The situation creates a conflict of interest, as the auditor may be auditing their own work or may be influenced by the finance manager's position. Key points: partiality is compromised. The presence of a finance manager being audited undermines the auditor's ability to remain impartial. Conflict of interest. Disagreement can lead to conflicts that affect the integrity of the audit process. Regulatory standards. Auditors are required to adhere to strict independence rules, which prohibit them from auditing their own work or having relationships that could impair their objectivity. Conclusion, summary, it is a breach of independence for an audit committee to include a finance manager who is being audited, as it compromises the auditor's impartiality and creates potential conflicts of interest. So there's a problem there. The next thing I'd like to add is, since our resident shared that he already knows, Nathan, that could be a conflict. The last thing I guess I'd like to say is the reason we're doing this is because it is in compliance with the city charter. to have an independent audit. And it's really interesting to me that this committee, without a proposal in front of you, without knowing if any GASB standards have changed, if anything in the accounting world has changed, that you could actually vote on pushing a contract forward. To me, that's a dereliction of duty. Where's the proposal? What are you voting on? And basically what you're doing here, you're not looking at the scope, you're not looking at what the proposal should be. And basically, this is kind of a illegitimate meeting because you don't have independence. All yours, Mr. Wake.
I tried the last.
In part to Don's points, I would highly recommend that you rely heavily on GFOA. Don, I'm sure you're familiar with that from service testing for guidance on independent audits. If they have this wonderful booklet, I don't know if it's still in print or not. If you're familiar with this in blue, I would suggest that get printed a copy because I don't know it's and certainly all essential for guiding work. I'm familiar.
Yep, I was gonna offer it up if they need it, yep.
Gotcha, so we'll have an exam on it next week. So
Maybe a little trial.
Probably.
so I certainly second a lot of people saying all of it. The second item I want to raise is the minutes are available to you all from the Portsmouth School Board Finance Committee, dated April 1st. In there are some strong concerns regarding internal controls and the ability for them to get their arms around financial dynamics of the school, which is, as we know, the major component of the city's expenditures. I would ask, suggest that when you meet or correspond with CLA, ask them to please focus school auditing needs and financial needs because there are a lot of potential problems there. And I know one of the reasons that we hired CLA was their expertise in technology. They are crying out, they're sorely needing technology, trying to get their arms around the budget, which is a huge component of activities. So please consider that in your communication with CLA. So
But may I speak again for this one? Sure. For those of you who aren't familiar with financial audits, there is two kinds of audits here, and the last contract was a compliance audit. And due to what Mr. White just mentioned, my recommendation would be to do a full financial audit. There has been a lot of I don't know what you want to say, things that have come to the attention of a lot of us that I myself have asked in at least 2 or 3 of the last meetings to request a full financial audit. You have not had one, it's only been a compliance audit. And that's why it's important to get a proposal and see what the cost difference would be. But if you're going to move forward with this auditor at this time without a proposal, I think that would be a detriment not to at least get a proposal for a financial versus a compliance audit. And I'm sure you know what this is, Mike.
Yeah, well, I guess they issued a qualified, they issue a typical audit opinion, financial audit.
They do not look at internal controls and they.
No, it's not an internal control
Right.
review, which I guess I would look at as a additional procedure, not a regular financial audit.
Right, and it's very important because a lot of the administrative code has just been changed.
Mhm.
And I think it's very important to look at if you have I can give you a couple examples, I've just seen, for example.
Yep.
That you have somebody who could request something and who could also sign off on something to be paid. So there's a lot of overlap on internal controls, basically.
Yep. They do an assessment as part of the financial audit of your internal control environment. But the type of procedure you're referring to would be more a detailed test of controls in conjunction with the audit, which would be an additional procedure on top of just the normal financial audit.
People more money.
Yeah, agreed, it would be called an agreed upon procedure. Internal control as well, which would test those particular components of the controls that are stated to be in existence by the client, which would list.
Due to the changes that were made since this was established and the first contract was established, I think it was very prudent to add that because nobody knows what's working, and from my perspective, I'm seeing some things that are very questionable. So,
Question for probably Suzanne or Nathan or yourself, in the charter, other than section 7.4, there such thing that refers to the audit committee? Yeah. Okay, so an independent audit shall be made of all accounts of the city government at least annually and more frequently if deemed necessary by the city council. Such audit shall be made by certified public accountants selected by and reporting to the city council based on the accountant's experience in municipal accounting. The results of this audit shall be made public and the annual report of this business shall be made available. I'm not a lawyer, but the way I read that is we're not doing the audit here in this room. None of us are doing the audit. We're not auditors or whatever, they might be certified public accountants. We're recommending that we hire professionals to do the audit who would be independent. And then we're reviewing the report of the independent professionals as an additional oversight step. I'm sure there's lots of interpretations, but that's how I personally read the charter, which is kind of our guideline for this.
Correct, and the auditors, when you think about it, they are engaged, if you will, by the city council. So they take their, correct me if I'm wrong, but their ultimate responsibility is to the city council, the elected body. That's, so.
Michael, could you please explain what the difference between the financial and compliance audit and internal controls to some of the non-financial? It's a big deal, Mr. Bagley.
And it might be a big deal to you, and I appreciate that, but
Most
it's,
financial people it is.
yes, and I'm gonna hire experts. Not try to become one at a half hour.
Nobody's asking you.
We're not asking you to do that, we're asking you to be an educated consumer.
Yeah,
I think that we can look into it and certainly ask what the cost would be for that and get some feedback from our professional auditor as to whether or not they would recommend something like that.
Nathan, am I correct that as you're setting up that ERP, the new system of accounts payroll, there are internal controls is really a huge, well, after the migrating of all the data and all that, is part of the setup. So there's almost going to be a natural opportunity to revisit in some ways internal controls from the original purchase order requisition request, as someone who sat through that training recently with you. And there are approvals and steps all throughout that. So as we're thinking about that, I guess, what is your thinking in terms of that structure and how you're setting it up and working with the new software? Maybe, is that helpful at all to this conversation?
Well, I mean, I think that's part of what we're going through. For instance, I've said all along, we'll have a new purchasing policy coming out at the other end because some of the steps that we're going through will look different. There, part of it will be to make sure that we encapsulate realities like online permission or online approvals through authenticated, IDs and passwords logging in, because there will be more that is digitally signed than is blue ink signed when, because we want to eliminate manual processing and use the system to its fullest. And so coming out the other end, and through the process, we'll be able to, as we build the business logic, ensure that we are establishing the controls that we want, and then we'll document those so that we come out with a system and a policy that we hand them, but we're not purposes. But it's I mean, going through this exercise is already proving to be exhausting, but it's because we're able to contemplate best practices. We're leaning on the consultant to explain to us the alternatives, the options, what the software allows for, what other places have done and how that might be incorporated here. And so, I mean, I think we really believe that we're gonna come out stronger
Yeah,
and more contemporary and more contemporary.
one nice component of the new software is that you can provide under access or read-only access where they can look at your system to a full extent, which is a lot different scope than what we experience now, where we only have detailed tests of reporting samples. And therefore, in my opinion, the client has really more control, but a lot less control with just kind of opening your system. Look at what they like. The hope is all of our documentation goes paperless in that system. It's very time consuming now. They actually are off site. We need to make a couple changes because of the volume of paper that we have, we're scanning all to them. We've
And
got
all
these
the
stacks
time.
on tapes, pulling staples for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. It seems just very time consuming for this
Seeing paper.
day and age of work. So it's gonna be a really good transition. What is the, what about it?
Before you know, sure, I want to offer a couple of, the proposal is a continuation of the master services agreement that we have in place. Statement of work is expected to be the same in each of the 3 years that we're contracting for. And in order to move forward, I anticipate that we'll put that before the council. And we'll also ask for audit, like that language, because that's what I've heard you before. Special,
For additional work?
yeah, like if we were gonna do a internal control.
Oh, an agreed upon
Agreed
procedure.
upon procedure, thank you very much.
Yeah.
We'll call for that and ask for that, and then that can be before the council as well, if. When we get that information, I'm sure they can spin that around, although we'll have to describe to them exactly what it is that we'll.
Yeah, and I think in those instances, we agreed upon procedures, if the audit committee ever wanted to go that route, is that you would describe specifically the area of controls that we wanted reviewed. As part of our audit planning process, they do walk through a typical cash receipt, cash disbursement, payroll, as well as your documented controls as part of their risk assessment to determine test you want. But again, a full agreed upon procedure would be detailed testing of those controls where they provide feedback based on a particular standard procedure that is documented very clear and important for what was being looked at. So it definitely is a different type of scope. I will say for our federal audit, where we have our audit of all of our federal funds received, it's more of a compliance audit in that they do detailed testing and making sure that your requirements of the different federal funds that you've received. At the same time, they do provide feedback if there are any potential weaknesses in the control. But if it's not impacting your actual financial figures to your material level, or is a significant deficiency in the sense that it could lead to further problems if that certain type of procedure is not tightened up or refined. They do provide those comments during their single audit as well, if something did arise, but the agreed upon procedure almost is like you get an automatic, you get comments no matter what, because they're kind of reporting on each exact procedure that they're following and doing their analysis, and that's why it's a little more robust and a beefier report that it's.
Thanks, sir.
All right, if there are no other comments from the members, I will adjourn the meeting. December 16th. Yes, I'll leave you meeting. Like being more city on December 16th. You can. This on the agenda, then I will.
It would be one, yes.